Let's not ease into this. There's something you've been carrying for so long, it's become part of your posture. Something that whispers louder every time you turn the lights off and dares to suggest that everything you believe about yourself might be a carefully crafted lie. It's not your conscience, it's not logic. It's the voice you buried years ago, the one that never stopped watching you. And if you think you can keep ignoring it, let me tell you what no one else will. Your shadow isn't scared of your progress. It's waiting for your performance to crack. It doesn't care about how humble you act. It doesn't dissolve when you try to be good. It studies you, quietly, intimately. And when you finally run out of distractions, it surfaces, not to punish you, but to show you what's been underneath all along. So ask yourself, what if the version of you you've spent your life defending is nothing more than a polished escape route? What if your degrees, your discipline, your reputation are just adhesive masks stuck over the face you've been too afraid to meet? Jung didn't define growth as polishing your image. He called it betrayal. Betrayal of the mask. Betrayal of the story. Betrayal of the self you built to survive. You've fed a narrow idea of who you are, convinced that if you hold it together long enough, you'll become untouchable. But what if that idea is exactly what's choking you? What if the pain you feel right now isn't weakness? It's your psyche warning you that this moment is more dangerous than any failure you've ever feared. Because the moment you face your shadow, you burn the bridge back. No one talks about that. No one teaches that self-liberation begins with self-betrayal, not of your soul, but of the saint you pretend to be. That part of you you've locked away, the one that envies, that fantasizes about power, that lies, it isn't the enemy. It's the orphaned truth. And if you don't integrate it, it will sabotage every attempt you make at growth. Not because it's evil, but because you gave it no other role to play. The more you strive to look perfect, the more power you give to what you refuse to face. They sold you the lie that success means polishing the self. But the real victory is tearing it down, by choice, before it breaks you. It begins with a death, not of the body, but of the identity you swore you couldn't live without. A symbolic death, a surrender of everything you once called non-negotiable. And that's the price of real transformation. Jung didn't romanticize it. He called it individuation, a process so raw, it demands you shatter every image you've built just to meet the part of you you've spent your life avoiding. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. That's what he wrote. But awakening isn't poetic. It's a collapse, a burning, a violent ending of who you thought you were. So I'll ask you directly, are you willing to let that version of yourself die? Or will you protect the fantasy that keeps your life comfortably small? You can't have both. You can't awaken and still cling to the identity that helps you feel safe. You can't step into your own power while defending the story that was built to keep you hidden. And that's where most people stop. Not because they're weak, but because true wisdom isn't intellectual. It's brutal. It's courageous. It forces you to admit that the main thing in your way is you. Look at your path. Every time real change approached, something inside whispered that it was too much, too dangerous, that if you dropped the character, you'd lose everything. That voice is resistance, the ego's last soldier, the gatekeeper of the prison you mistake for your personality. You'll only cross that line once you understand that your shadow isn't a monster. It's half your truth. And if you keep chasing perfection, if you keep feeding the illusion of being above it all, you'll fracture. You'll look functional on the outside, but inside, you'll be brittle, afraid of your own depth. Growth doesn't want your hero costume. It wants your honesty. It wants the rage, the fear, the control, not to shame it, but to reintegrate what you tried to exile. That betrayal is the seed of your freedom. So ask yourself the question no one dares. Who are you still loyal to? The version of you that kept saying yes to survive? Or the truth that's been whispering from your shadow all along? Because you can only choose one. And if you keep choosing the sweetened version of yourself, you'll spend a lifetime maintaining what was never real to begin with. But if you dare to betray that mask, if you allow the darkness in and stop trying to kill what was never wrong, you begin the only journey that matters, the one that leads to the human you were meant to become. No one can do this for you. No one will hand you a map to your unconscious. You'll have to enter the wilderness of your psyche alone and sit face to face with the parts that terrify you most. And there, in that exile, you'll discover that your anger, your control, your thirst for power weren't flaws. They were energy, fragmented, disoriented, desperate to be seen. If you learn to recognize them, they stop imprisoning you. They become fuel, raw, volcanic. Most people never reach that point. They'd rather carry a polished lie than face the terror of becoming someone they've never met. But that terror, that's the only doorway to inner power, the real kind, the kind no title or performance can fake. You wonder why so many walk through life with everything and still feel hollow? Because they built their existence on a version of themselves that never had roots. They rejected the shadow, and in doing so, rejected their own power. Today, you can keep wearing that mask. The one you've convinced yourself will one day feel like skin. Or you can admit what you already know. It no longer protects you from anything. That tremor you feel inside right now, that's the call. The invitation to look at yourself without defense, without disguise, and say, enough. Enough playing warden to your own prison. Enough mistaking comfort for aliveness. Because in the end, everything comes down to one choice. Will you stay loyal to a dead image, or will you risk being real? To betray the character isn't failure. It's freedom. It's the most dangerous act of self-respect you'll ever commit. When you dare to betray the costume, you become whole, and nothing, no rejection, no failure, no judgment, can take that from you. But don't be fooled. If you think this is the breakthrough, you're still at the surface. Because betraying the old self is just the first burn. The real fire starts when you begin to tear down the ideals you built in its place. Yes, the gods you created, the inner idols, the polished versions of success, intelligence, perfection, belonging. The ones you fantasized into existence, believing that if only you could embody them, your pain would vanish. But let me say this clearly. There is no perfect identity waiting to rescue you. No future version of yourself will absolve you of the task you've been avoiding, facing your humanity in its totality. The dark, the contradictions, the fear, the light. It's strange, isn't it? The more you chase perfection, the further you drift from power. And that's the secret no one tells you. Because to admit it means confessing that perfectionism is nothing but shame in disguise, a desperate attempt to cover what you're terrified to show. Every time you tell yourself you should be more successful, more disciplined, more good, you betray something sacred. You declare that who you are, in your rawest form, isn't worthy of existing. And as long as that belief lives in you, no matter how composed you look, you will carry a quiet fear. What if they find out I'm not the image I'm selling? That fear is the real fracture. It's what Jung saw as the most brutal form of betrayal. Not of others, but of the self. Not just the abandonment of the old identity, but the surrender of the fantasy that one day you'll be flawless. It means standing in front of your shadow and saying, "You don't have to disappear for me to deserve peace." It means realizing that your strength doesn't come from being immaculate. It comes from being whole. And wholeness requires darkness. It requires standing still and saying, "This is me, with all the parts I was taught to reject." Can you feel that? Real liberation doesn't come from achievement. It comes from the moment you stop hiding, from the weight that drops when you no longer need to keep up the show, from the silence that arrives when you stop defending your own mask. And why is this step so terrifying? Because it strips you of excuses. As long as you believe you're just one habit away from being enough, you can postpone the truth. You can keep telling yourself, "One day, when I finally become perfect, I'll be allowed to live without fear." But that day never comes. It was never real. Freedom doesn't arrive with perfection. It begins the second you stop chasing it. When you finally accept your own chaos, your contradictions, your human limits. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What would happen if you stopped trying to prove your worth all the time? What kind of silence would appear if you weren't constantly shaping yourself into someone else's dream? Maybe you can't imagine it yet. Because you've worn this character for so long, it feels like skin. But the second you let go of the need to be flawless, something surprising appears. Stillness. Real stillness. A peace not dependent on praise or progress. Just presence. Most people never feel it. They prefer the noise of self-demand, because at least that struggle feels productive. But what they don't see is that this endless effort is the most sophisticated form of self-hatred. It keeps you busy enough to never notice. You've been fighting yourself to avoid feeling what's already true. And this is where inner transformation begins to shift shape. Because integrating the shadow isn't enough, not if you're still addicted to fixing yourself. You also have to let go of the belief that one day you'll become complete, flawless, worthy of eternal applause. That fantasy is the final illusion. Jung's individuation was never about reaching a finished state. It's not about arriving at perfection. It's the refusal to abandon any part of yourself. It's a lifetime of confronting, reconciling, and reclaiming the pieces you were told to exile. Every day, you're offered the chance to split, to hide the fear, suppress the anger, deny the need for validation. But this process only begins when you stop pretending those things don't belong to you. That hunger for control? Yours. That panic around rejection? Yours. That aching need to be recognized? Still yours. Right now, something inside you may resist this. A part of you clings to the promise that if you just try a little harder, one day you'll become untouchable, admired, beyond reproach. But that dream is emotional anesthesia. It dulls you, keeps you quiet, keeps you performing. The truth is, you don't need to be pristine to have value. You don't need to achieve anything before you're allowed to live with purpose. In fact, the sooner you stop chasing that impossible demand, the sooner your real power begins to surface. Because real success, the kind that doesn't break under failure or beg for validation, is born from one thing: the decision to stop performing perfection and start embodying complexity. Not as a weakness, as a form of consciousness. You see it now, don't you? This isn't just about confidence. This is internal revolution. A symbolic death you agree to every day, letting the illusion die that says your worth is borrowed from other people's recognition. Your power has nothing to do with what you've achieved. It's measured in your ability to remain grounded while your ego shatters. It's felt in the moment you act without chasing applause, without fear of being misunderstood, without the pressure to appear unbreakable. It's the freedom to be human, without apology. And if you feel exhausted right now, that's because you're finally arriving at a truth most people avoid their entire lives. So I'll ask, will you retreat to the warmth of your fantasies, or will you cross the line and finally meet what's behind the mask? No one's coming to break it for you. No one can, because the final chain isn't their judgment. It's your belief that you still have to be more than what you already are. And when you let that go, that's when everything starts. That's when you stop running. And that's when your real power begins. There's a voice rising now. One you've been trying to silence for years. It doesn't ask for permission. It demands that you stand up. Because you've spent too long playing a role in a story you didn't write. A predictable act in a life that never asked who you really are. But be honest with yourself. Aren't you tired of performing the same character over and over? Of listening to your own internal monologue like a broken record, repeating the same lines you swore you'd outgrow? Most never get to this point. They quit before the silence becomes unbearable. Because when the mask quiets, the shadow speaks. And what it says is terrifying and magnificent. Everything you fear about yourself is exactly what makes you whole. You are not just your brilliance or your kindness. You are also your jealousy, your control, your raw, unmet hunger. You are the sum of contradictions. And only by integrating all of it can you reclaim your power. So hear me now, because I won't say it twice. If you truly want a life worth living, stop asking for permission to be who you are. There's no more time to waste. Every day you postpone your inner transformation, you're feeding the ghost that wants you tame. But that ghost is already dying. The only question is whether you'll bury it yourself, or go down with it. And maybe now your chest is tightening. Maybe your hands feel like they're hovering between a cliff and a choice. Don't ignore it. That's the signal you're alive. And if you've made it here, I'll tell you something I won't say to just anyone. There is a power inside you so ancient, so unstoppable. You don't need to prove it. You just need to unlock it. But to do that, you'll have to betray everything you thought was sacred. Here's the irony. The more you resist transformation, the deeper you fall into the very emptiness you pretend isn't there. But the moment you break the image, the moment you meet your shadow face to face, everything you've been avoiding becomes your greatest ally. You stop moving from fear. You stop chasing validation. You move because you finally understand that real life only begins where you're most afraid to go. So before you leave, ask yourself one thing. Without tricks, without defense, will you keep choosing the comfort of your character or the vertigo of becoming who you actually are? Will you wait to be recognized as perfect, or will you start living without needing permission? Because once you cross that line, once you see your shadow with clear eyes, there is no greater victory than feeling whole, without needing anyone to clap for it. And that moment is the beginning of everything you've ever wanted. If this touched something in you, if you feel that quiet vertigo, the trembling clarity, write this in the comments. I'm no longer asking for permission. And if you want this to be just the start of what we uncover together, subscribe. Not for feel-good inspiration, but for the truths no one else dares to say. And now I'll leave you with something you probably weren't expecting to hear. You don't need to become more. You need to remember who you were before the world convinced you to forget.